Okay, it's 4:47 p.m. sharp now, and I think it's a good time for us to start the session proper. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Threats and Opportunities presented by COVID-19 for cybersecurity, businesses, and startups. Thank you for taking time out and being here today. Hello to folks who are based in Singapore. For some of you, this is not the first SGN event that you have tuned into, and I certainly hope that this is not the last. I also like to extend a warm welcome to our newcomers. We have quite a diverse crowd here. To folks who are tuning in from Hong Kong, Beijing, Shanghai, India, Dubai, Yangon, and KL, I think it's great for us to have you here with us today. If I miss out any of you, my apologies, but do please tell us where you're from in the chat box below, and say hi to everyone who is here today. My name is Ethan, and I'm from the Singapore Global Network, or SGN for short. The SGN is a division in the Economic Development Board of Singapore, and its mission is to broaden and deepen our overseas networks, comprising overseas Singaporeans, as well as friends and fans of Singapore. This event is SGN's first collaboration with the Virtual Growth Conference, which many of you are familiar with. We are very excited to co-organize this session with Benson to bring you this Singapore edition of the Virtual Growth Conference. It's also our privilege to have Linda and Joseph as our speakers this afternoon. Okay, before we start, here are 3 housekeeping rules. Firstly, for us to have a good experience in this session, we have turned off the video, audio, and screen sharing functions for all participants. Secondly, we would love to hear your questions, and we definitely want to make this session as interactive as possible. So please do use the Q&A function if you have questions for our speakers. You can also upvote questions which you want answered in the session. Lastly, in case you miss any part of this session or wish to view this webinar on demand, we are recording this session and will make it available online. For those of you just joining us, welcome to this webinar on threats and opportunities presented by COVID-19 for cybersecurity businesses and startups. We're just getting started. Okay, this is how we're going to spend our time this afternoon. We'll have a quick introduction of the speakers and moderator. Following this, our speakers will share their perspectives on a few key topics, including the cybersecurity and startup scene in Singapore and the region, and how businesses and startups are reinventing themselves in response to COVID-19. Just before we wrap up, we'll have a Q&A. So please do just pop your questions in the Q&A function on the bottom panel here. We are very happy to have Benson moderating our session this afternoon. I'll now turn the time over to Benson, and I really hope everyone will enjoy the program that we have lined up for you today. Benson, please.
Cool. Thanks so much, Ethan. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. Great to have you here at this event with SGN. As just a quick intro to Virtual Growth Conference, we've been running this for the past 6 months, mostly focused on Asia and with Asian startups and entrepreneurs here and investors as well. And we like to use this opportunity to speak together with interesting speakers to gather perspectives, especially with trends coming in the next few years, especially with the COVID-19 situation. And really happy to have Joseph and Linda here as well today, who can share more on those perspectives. Myself, I'm founder of ZenCode, and full disclosure, we're also implementing some solutions with VKey. And together with some other sponsors, including SGN, we've been working on this Virtual Growth Conference. So I just want Joseph, if you could introduce yourself, and then Linda after that as well. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Benson. So I'm currently the CEO and I'm one of the co-founders of VKey. We started VKey almost 10 years ago now in 2011. I had come from Singapore's Ministry of Defense, heading up the Cybersecurity Lab and Cryptography Lab. And we saw a big gap in terms of this whole digitalization trend that was just starting with the advent of smartphones at the time. And at the time, we were all using hardware tokens, smart cards, SIM cards and all that. And we knew that there was going to be a big need for software-based solutions that we could run in our mobile phones. So we invented our VOS, our core technology, which is now patented all over the world, and basically developed solutions that we deployed for the banks, government, payment wallets, healthcare, IoT, and really tried to solve this problem over the past 10 years. It's been an exciting journey. I'm excited to talk a bit more about that over the course of this webinar today.
Awesome. Thanks, Joseph. Linda, if you could also introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Benson. So my name is Linda Nguyen Schindler, and I'm the program head of I-71 here in Singapore. I-71 stands for Innovation Cybersecurity Ecosystem at Block 71, which is the famed cybersecurity startup hub here in Singapore. We are founded by Singtel Innovate, which is the VC arm of leading telco Singtel Group, and as well as the National University of Singapore, NUS. We are also sponsored by CSA, which is the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore, as well as IMDA, the Infocom Media Development Authority here. So we are this perfect organization with all the different partners, right? We have public, private, government, bringing everyone together and creating these connections for our startups and for our cybersecurity community here in Singapore.
That's awesome. Thanks so much. Sounds like very interesting scenes in Singapore now. And I see that cybersecurity seems to be the thing that the government is supporting. So I'm just wondering, what happened when you first started, Joseph? Was it like that? Or is it definitely changed now?
Yeah, I'm very envious of the startup founders today. I think, back in 2011, when we started VKey, most of my colleagues and friends were like, wow, Joseph, you're so brave. But of course, we had a good team. There was a clear business requirement. We did believe that we had the technology that could make it big. But I tell the founders today, and I personally mentor at I-71 as well, right? I tell them, look, you guys have so much support today. There's so much funding. Back in the day, we had, maybe a bit of Series A funding. There was a Series B gap, clearly. Our own fundraising definitely preceded a lot of the growth of venture capital in Singapore. And there's so much investment pouring into the sector in Singapore, including the cybersecurity sector. In fact, just a few days ago, it was announced that the foreign investments into Singapore grew to, in fact, $13 billion, which was a huge jump from a year ago, actually. So it really shows that amidst this whole thing, even with COVID-19, even with the whole downturn, I think people still believe in Singapore. People still believe in innovation here. And I think it's really exciting time to be a startup founder, even this year, I think.
That's interesting. And how did you first start, Joseph? Is it something that came out of passion, or is it something that came out of necessity, or both combined together?
I think it was definitely passion. To be frank, I left a very well-paying job in the Ministry of Defense. I had to do my sums and like, wow, this is a big opportunity cost for me, right? But I think, I always wanted to do startups. I had been in Silicon Valley, in the late 90s during the dot-com boom. I was fortunate enough to miss the dot-com bust. I was back in Singapore by the time. But, I always followed the startup sector, the VC blogs and all that. I was like, oh, I kind of want to always do something, right? But I was happy in MINDEF, I think, in Ministry of Defense. Really exciting technology, learned a lot. But this really exciting opportunity with my co-founders came along, and I'm like, wow, I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life if I don't jump into this and really see what can be done, and really do something exciting in my life.
Awesome. Now, I'm sure you had a lot of challenges along the way. Would there be something that you would be willing to share about that, some challenge that you encountered and how you overcame it? Yeah,
I think there probably, maybe I'll share about 3 major areas. I won't talk at depth about all of them. The first was, I think we learned quite early on that, it was hard to get talent in particular. There wasn't a lot of support for cybersecurity talent. Talent pool was really small at the time. Today we have tons of agencies developing and grooming talent. But 10 years ago, it was a very small pool and we were a very niche provider. So it was difficult to get good talents at the time. And to be frank, I think we made mistakes along the way, trying to hire people who we thought could do the job, but, not necessarily focusing on attitude or not necessarily focusing on the ability to grow with the company. So over time, many of them have left as well, right? As we found, things have changed along the way. So talent was one area that I think was challenging, especially in the early years. And I think it's going to be challenging for most startups. A second area that was difficult for us was certainly fundraising. I think, to be frank, we were already very fortunate. My fellow co-founders had done a couple of startups before VKey each. And we were able to raise our Series A, Series B funding relatively easily. But still, I look at the opportunities that the startups have today, from early stage funding to later stage VC funding, and I'm really envious of the support that they have available to them. And of course, I think the third area was just the technology and the product fit. I think for any cybersecurity startup, any startup, in fact, you have to really try to figure out where your fit is. And we started out being a very, very techy company. I used to be the chief technology officer, and I visit startups in California, and their first 3 hires are CEO, CTO, of course, but then maybe a chief product officer or VP of product, and maybe marketing and so on, right? And our first marketing hire was maybe 5 years into running the company, right? So I still remember being in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh, coming back from the airport after visiting a customer quite early on, and I asked our partner there, any feedback for us? They said, oh no, your product's fine. I think you guys just need to spend more effort in marketing yourselves. So I think that tends to be the case for many startups. We tend to focus on that, the technology rather than finding a good product fit. And I think that's one thing I advise the startups these days, to really focus on that very early on, right? Not just to leave it as an afterthought.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Actually, you raised some interesting points on talent and funding. Maybe, Linda, you could offer this perspective as well, a difference between Silicon Valley and Singapore in terms of talent and funding, especially in the cybersecurity front.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Silicon Valley, although I went to UC Berkeley, and I know Joseph went to Stanford, so...
let's not go there.
We have to, we're rivals there. But I just think it's really different, and I think there's just a real opportunity here for startups, and especially for cybersecurity startups, right? Here, especially in Singapore, you have so much support, right? You have this vibrant startup ecosystem. Then you have the government support. So we have the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore who will come in and they'll help fund. But more importantly than that, they really help with the connections with the startups and potential end users and potential investors, right? So that's part of the reason why their support of I-71 is to facilitate this, as well as I don't know if you heard last week, right? The Singapore Fortitude budget, they came out with almost $300 million to match private investments to promising startups. And then you have things like the National University of Singapore. They have their resilience and growth initiatives where they're connecting graduates with access to technology, to seed funding, to incubation support. So there's just this real sense of, support here that you just have so many resources to succeed. So I think that really sets the foundation for strong growth. Now, that being said, you still have to have, a good solution. You still have to have the right elements in place. But with that kind of support and strong foundation, it really helps startups to succeed.
Right. Do you think there's such a thing as too much support?
Too much support only, I think, if their startups are only relying on that, right? If the only way that your startup is getting any kind of funding is through government grants, and then I think you're in trouble. But I think if you use that as an enabler to what you're already doing, right? You already have traction. You already are, have the customer base. You just need that extra support and the extra help to boost you to the next level. Then I think that works really well.
Right. Okay. And do you see there's a certain trend in what investors invest in and certain trend in what companies are looking for right now in cybersecurity?
Well, I mean, I think right now, so we're at I-71, right? We're an incubator, an accelerator. So we really help cybersecurity startups. So we supercharge their growth and we help them to scale. And so what we're seeing is with, the advent of everyone going online, whether it be work from home, remote access, cloud. With that, we see a definite need for cybersecurity in those areas, and that will only increase, right? I mean, I think we're looking at right now, you think COVID-19, it's going to affect negatively the cybersecurity companies, in which in many ways it will, just like any other industry. However, I think when you look at the statistics, we have something, it said the global cybersecurity market size is expected to grow from USD $183 billion last year to $230 billion by 2021, right? And this is due to the growth in work from home and remote services programs. So there's a real opportunity there for cybersecurity startups, but they just have to overcome some of the challenges, right? Like, right now, since the economy will be down, the concern is whether or not cybersecurity spending is considered discretionary, right? We all know it's important, but will the end users be willing to spend, and will they be willing to spend it on a startup? Will they just go to, the standard, big company that they know? So those are the kinds of things that we're seeing.
Right. Okay. And in terms of those startups that you see, what is the current, what is the more popular cybersecurity startup that you see right now?
The more popular, gosh, it's like saying who's your favorite child? I don't think I'm allowed to say that, but I can give you some examples. One of our startups is called Digify, and what they do is they protect, track, and control important documents right after sending. So that obviously you see with everyone working from home right now, that's something that's going to be really important. We have 689 Cloud, one of our startups who's based in Vietnam. They're like a Dropbox, that they can really secure your documents. And so what else? We have a startup called Send Forensics, and they can help companies with email spoofing. So we're seeing increase in email spoofing and phishing attacks. So, some of these solutions I think will only continue to see positive growth in the years to come.
Right. And then speaking of startups and pitching the startups, Joseph, I'm sure you had your experience of pitching in the past. I'm just wondering, what was your first pitch like? Can you tell us a little bit about how you went with that?
Okay, sure. As I mentioned, my co-founders had a fair bit of context, both in the investment field as well as in key customer segments. So specifically banking, government, and so on. And Singapore is not very big. And especially back in 2011, the sector was even smaller at the time. So I can definitely remember 3 sets of pitches which were relatively early. One, we actually started talking to VCs very early. I still remember I filed the patent at the International Property Office of Singapore the day before my first VC meeting. I had to write the patent myself because, I couldn't afford to pay a lawyer $4,000 to help me draft it, right? Fortunately, I'd taken a technical writing class in Stanford where writing a patent was one of the assignments. So I looked it up, Googled a bit, and it's like, okay, this is how it's going to look like, call a friend for help and stuff like that. Free advice over the phone. So VC pitches, actually, we started doing very early because we knew, it's not like you meet a VC once, your pitch is perfect, and they're going to invest in you immediately. They may want to keep in touch with you, it takes a few months, they may tell you your pitch doesn't make sense, and then you go back and refine it, and you probably already burned that VC, so you go talk another one. So we started the VC pitches actually very early on. And looking back at my PowerPoints then, I'm like, oh, wow, these graphics are crappy, right? But yeah, that was back in 2011. Another one that we did fairly early on was actually just customer presentations. So specifically, we started with the banks in Singapore. We had contacts with all 3 local banks. We didn't start with the largest ones, so we went to one of the smaller ones, and we said, this is what we can help you with. This is our technology, and let's tell us what you think, where to solve your problems, and so on. And banks aren't the fastest of customers, so it still took us a while to sign them up. But we had to start that, we had to refine it, we had to kind of bounce off the ideas with them and say, hey, does this make sense for you? And the third one was actually the government, interestingly enough. Again, we were trying to solve this not just for the banks, but also for government type authentication. And so we actually met with them fairly early on, and again, pitched our solution to them. And they gave us very, very practical feedback, and pulled in other partners that could give us very specific technical advice about what we should do to make it easy for them to adopt our solution as well. But I think all of those three were quite successful. Overall, we closed our Series A funding within the first 12 months, in fact, of founding the company. We signed a strategic partnership contract with one of the banks, again, just before raising our Series A, and we signed an MOU, a strategic partnership agreement with one of the government agencies as well. So I think, it's important to engage your customers very early, even if your pitch is crappy. You have good ideas, you're open, you are frank in your discussions, and you take your customer feedback in, they'll help you refine your pitch, and, it will help you really be able to close those deals and close those rounds of fundings eventually.
Right. It's interesting you were mentioning that about having something solid to kind of show the VCs and then going through a few VCs. I'm just wondering that usually startups have the mentality of fake it till you make it, but I guess in cybersecurity, it's a totally different game. Maybe if you could let us know, what is the mindset of an early stage cybersecurity startup? What should be the right mindset? Joseph and Linda, or?
Yeah, I'll touch a bit and Linda can chime in, I guess.
Sure.
I guess you're right. You can't really fake it. I mean, it's okay to show, okay, this is what we can do, stuff like that. But, substantively, your idea must make sense. Substantively, your product needs to resonate with the customer. To understand if your dashboard is, maybe not quite Ajax ready, not quite as responsive as it needs to be, maybe only works on, Chrome browser and not on Safari or whatever. Those are fine, right? But I think cybersecurity is actually quite a technical area. And one of the things we faced very early on was, we'll go into a meeting and the CISOs or the IT security managers or the IT security engineers on the other side will be throwing out all sorts of questions for us. And we learned very quickly what they were looking for. And if we, and you can't really charm or fake your way out of that, right? They ask you, do you comply with this standard? Do you have this certification? Or, can you interoperate with this? You can say, okay, yes, we can build it in 2 weeks' time. Let me get back to you. You can say, oh yeah, this certification will take 6 months. We intend to do it after you raise our Series A. That's fine, right? But you need to be able to answer, which is what we did. For example, we said, well, FIPS 140-2, which we did get as a certification. We said, oh yes, we think we can comply. We looked at this. We're built to these standards. It's just going to cost a bit of money and time to get it, and that's fine. But there will be technical questions around your cryptography, your key management, how you defend against insider attacks. And, the first time you go and meet that IT security guy who thinks he's smarter than you, you probably don't have an answer. And you go back and you're like, okay, let me try to figure out an answer for this. And you come running back, hopefully, within a couple of days, ideally, if not 1 or 2 weeks. So that's fine. But the idea substantively must be there. And, these interactions help you to refine your pitch and your product along the way as well.
Yeah, it's funny, you bring this up. We had at I-71, we had our investor closed door roundtable session yesterday. So we got together a small group of investors, to share. And I asked them, I said, so when you decide, on which startup to fund, I mean, do you go with that gut feel, because you like the founders? And the answer was absolutely not. At least in the beginning, right? Like they have to know what they're talking about. Technically, you have to be sound. So, cybersecurity is very complex, it's technical. They have to know what they're talking about. They just can't charm their way through it. But now, having said that, they said it's that last mile where that would come into play. That they're going to decide whether or not they're going to fund you. It's going to go to, that gut feeling and whether or not they presented well. So That's not to say, that it doesn't matter at all, but it just depends on what phase that you actually get to where it matters.
Right. That's good advice. That's definitely good advice. Do you see that in terms of Singapore being a place for early stage startups in cybersecurity, is there any natural advantage for them to set up in Singapore compared to other cities?
Well, I mean, what we're seeing is, like Singapore is maybe the Switzerland, as some people say. Singapore is like the Switzerland of the region. So with cybersecurity, it's actually a very interesting, sector where the users, they need to trust the solution, they need to trust the provider. And so, I do see that for the companies that are based here and that have headquarters here, there's kind of almost a natural trust that's built that stems from that. Again, prefacing that with, you still have to have a solid solution and moving forward from there. But I think that is a definite advantage. And like I said previously, with the government support, obviously you can't use it as a crutch, but if you use it as a stepping stone, I think it will be really beneficial. And of course, if you join I-71, you get access to that network of startups and corporates and investors. So, I mean, I joke about that, but actually the truth is that, the connections here are really important, right? It's not necessarily just what you know, it's going to be who you know. And so if you're tapped in with us, you automatically get access to like Singtel and NUS, the university and the investors and the corporates and the government agencies. So that kind of gives you an advantage when you walk through the door. We've had our startups tell us, if I was by myself and I tried to knock on the door, I couldn't get in. But once, we join the program and you kind of have that backing, then that actually helps them to, get their foot in the door. So that's really important.
Right. Why do you see cybersecurity as a field that is going to expand? What are some of the threats that are causing companies to look more into cybersecurity at the moment?
Gosh, the threats are coming from everywhere. Right? Joseph's like, yes, I can, he can tell you more about that. But look, cybersecurity, we think it's the horizontal that cuts through every vertical. Just like law, it now touches everybody, right? So that's, I always say, like law and cybersecurity, it touches everybody, but also unfortunately, like law, people don't think about it until it's too late. So obviously the budgets are set at, maybe 10%, 5% before you get a cyber attack. But then after you get hit, all of a sudden it's, here's the blank check. And hopefully by that point, it won't be too late to enact that, and especially for the SMEs, where you see once they get hit by cyber attack, something like 60 or 70% of them, don't make it past 6 months. So that's why, again, like with the government initiatives here with CSA and IMDA to help the small businesses, hopefully that they can implement that before they get attacked and they get that help, that will prevent, the future issues to come.
Joseph, do you want to add on to that as well, from your perspective?
Hello? He's saying no.
Was his screen a bit for? Okay.
Yes.
Anyway. Yep. So whilst we wait for Joseph to refresh, Linda, maybe I'd like to ask you another question as well. I mean, you've seen the past few years cybersecurity in Singapore taking a higher priority. Do you see more competition in the region as well for that?
I mean, yes, right. Whenever something is hot, right, so more people are going to be pivoting into cybersecurity. So, I mean, we've seen that, like startups that were doing, maybe something else, and they kind of pivot towards this. We also see actually a focus on the human element of it, right? So we talk about all the technical parts of it and how companies need to enact all these technical solutions. But we also see a lot of the solutions will then deal with the human element, right? And that might account for the largest percentage of the cyber attacks that happen. And so, they're just like different parts of cybersecurity in which people are attacking the solutions. And so more and more providers are coming in.
Right. I see. I think Joseph is kind of back. Joseph, I just want to see if you could add on to Linda's comment just now. Okay. I think we have a technical issue with Joseph. So, okay. In that case, Linda, just wanted to also ask you more on the background as well. You came previously from law into cybersecurity.
Yep.
Is there like a specific reason you saw that change and you wanted to follow that change?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you know, with cybersecurity, you could just see it, right? That's like the next big thing, and it, like I said previously, it affects every sector, and so it was really you know, exciting to have this opportunity to come in and really help build the cybersecurity here in Singapore and the region. You know, I-71, we're the region's first cybersecurity entrepreneur hub, and there are 3 other cybersecurity hubs in the world. You have one in the US, the UK, and Israel. And so Singapore is perfectly placed to be the 4th global hub for cybersecurity. And so for me, it was exciting to kind of become a recovering attorney and join, you know, this really vibrant, you know, ecosystem and to help build it. So that's something that's been really exciting for me personally.
Okay, awesome. I noticed you mentioned Israel there. I think a lot of people have that in their minds as to how strong that hub is.
Yeah.
Do you see any different perspectives that could make Singapore stronger than Israel in some ways? Is it technical? Is it talent? Is it something else?
Well, yes. I mean, Israel is mentioned a lot. I'm not going to lie. Like, I think when we talk to our investors, we, you know, have one of our Singapore-based investors, and actually his entire cyber portfolio is made up of Israeli startups, right? But like I said in the beginning, I do see that there is an incredible opportunity here because, you know, for many solutions is not just plug and play. You know, like the solutions that are developed elsewhere outside of the region may not be compatible with the, you know, the systems here and the way things work. And so I think, you know, there's a huge opportunity here for the cybersecurity startups to really grow and scale in the region, knowing the market better, knowing the customers better, and really having access to all the resources, I think makes, you know, a lot of difference.
Right, sure. I actually have a question from the audience. We can do the Q&A now. So here's an interesting question. With growing investments to cybersecurity, how would you see the approach in the region towards handling information, i.e. individual information or personal data?
Well, I mean, I think we're seeing that globally, people are more concerned with data. It used to be, what do they say? Data was the new oil, but I think we now see that data is the new air, you know, and now it's a question of whether or not the individual, how they feel about protecting their data, right? We all know that our data is being used, and so it's a matter of the trade-offs that we're willing to make. So for some of our startups, for example, they believe that the customer doesn't want to make that trade-off. So one of the startups in our last cohort, Memirium, what they do is they anonymize that information. So you can actually sell your data, but anonymously for companies who want to, you know, find out more about customers. So I thought that was, you know, really interesting. That are we going to move towards that where you protect your data, but yet still are able to, you know, the companies are still able to leverage that. So I think with the increasing use of our data to make our lives easier by the companies, there's going to be a turning point where, you know, if it hasn't already happened, right, where we're going to make a decision, you know, is our personal data worth the ease of use for products? And so we're going to see, I think, more and more startups that will come up and address the privacy and data concerns that will, like I said, anonymize user data, and that they can take the data. For example, one of our other startups, OneKey, he deals with a lot of the health clinics. and helps them with the, the data breach that was experienced here not too long ago. That people want to protect their personal health data, so they can use his key, which kind of looks like a USB drive, but they can actually keep their data with them at all times, and so they can plug it in and give the access to the health professionals to help them identify their ailments, but actually the data still remains with you, so that you can keep it secure. So we've seen some of those startups really kind of get some traction because of the data privacy concerns.
Right. I noticed some questions are being sent into the chat room. If you could instead put your questions in the Q&A function, that would be easier. Thank you. So there's a question from an investor, actually. So if investors were to hold on during the pandemic and the startups really need to scale up since the rivals don't stop, what do you think will happen to the startups who are growing slower and will lose the market share? Or do you think the ones that are well-funded will grow instead?
Well, I mean,
let me rephrase that if it's easier. So should the investor hold on during the pandemic, or should they fund the startup during this time?
Joseph, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Sorry about that. My previous computer kind of hung on me, so I had to switch computers. Actually, I had multiple VC setups in my home, fortunately. But yeah, so I think it's natural for investors to take a bit of a wait and see approach. I think quite clearly when it comes to cybersecurity, I think we've seen a huge uptick in demand from customers. I think Linda talked a bit about that. We've definitely seen that from our perspective as well. I think most investors, if they are angel investors, in particular individual investors, there's a bit of a worry, okay, what's going to happen in the economy and all that. But actually, if you take a step back and look at what's going to happen moving forward, actually, we are starting to see quite a bit of clarity around the impact of COVID-19 on various industries. And clearly, when it comes to the digital economy, when it comes to cybersecurity, this is where the opportunity is actually for investors moving forward. And I think it's quite interesting. I think a few weeks ago, I saw another diagram. It wasn't about COVID-19, but it was around previous downturns like this. And it really showed that, and this was more from a company perspective, but companies that were able to innovate during a downturn like this actually continue to do extremely well and pull ahead of the pack following that downturn. And I think that's similarly important in this period as well, whether you're an investor, whether you are a startup or an entrepreneur. Of course, you want to make sure you survive this period, right? You need to do whatever you need to do to make sure you can survive, whether it's closing more deals, raising more money, pay cuts, whatever it is, right? But actually, it's also equally important to make sure you position yourself well to make sure that you can really accelerate out of this period, and the opportunities are clearly there, right? I mean, we're using Zoom right now. Clearly, there was an opportunity that took off. Cybersecurity, as we've talked about, actually, we continue to see huge opportunities, huge spending from customers as well. And for example, we've seen that online grocery shopping, online e-commerce payments have doubled during this period compared to pre-COVID-19. So we have seen a rise in digitalization, that in the past would have taken us several years to get to this point. So I think there are opportunities, and from an investment perspective, the smart investors will, of course, continue to place their money smartly. You didn't throw around money before COVID-19, don't throw it around during COVID-19 either. But there are actually good companies and a lot of opportunities to invest in still.
Right. I mean, I think in talking to the investors in our community, we've seen, look, there's going to be VCs who are focused on supporting their current portfolio, right? They're going to try to help them figure out how to extend their runway, how to reduce their headcount, reduce salaries, how to cut costs quickly to survive. But we've also talked to investors who said, actually, you know what? Good teams are still good teams. And so the best investments they've made have been in a downturn in the economy. So, and so you have those investors who are naturally built, right, to take that risk. And so they can, be able to identify the opportunities. But what does that mean? I think for the founders, it just means that they have to work that much harder, that they have to change expectations, right? Just because you just received the funding doesn't mean, you continue the way that you were planning, that you don't take those salary cuts, that that you don't change your plans. We always tell our startups you have to pivot. And so, there are challenges in investments right now, but there are still investors that are saying the opportunities out there, we've raised the money, we need to spend it. So help me spend it by providing me, the solutions and the founding team that I can believe in and invest in.
Right. Actually, Joseph, because you were out there for a little while, I just wanted to get your perspective as well. So the question I asked Linda previously was Singapore and Israel. That's a comparison that people have naturally, right? What would you say are the natural advantages of Singapore over Israel, if there is such a thing?
Yeah, I visited Tel Aviv, I think it was 3 years ago now, so March 2017. And there was a trip specifically focused on cybersecurity. So we visited the VCs, a bunch of the startups there, tried to understand the ecosystem, talk to them. And I think one key difference between Israel and Singapore is, interestingly enough, Israel actually doesn't have a very strong domestic or regional market. And that's in some ways part of a key reason why we tend to hear so much about Israeli cybersecurity companies. Because the successful ones have been forced to go to the US, forced to go to Europe. In Singapore, interestingly enough, because we do have quite a lot of domestic support and domestic demand, and also a lot of regional demand coming from Southeast Asia. So, I mean, we ourselves, we have, absolutely correct, we are like the Switzerland of Southeast Asia. We have customers in the US, we have customers in China, we have customers in Europe, we have customers in the Middle East. Everybody can buy from Singapore, right? So that's a great thing about being in Singapore. It's not quite the same for Israel. It's a bit more sensitive, and they don't really have that local demand. So I think it's quite key for them. They have to springboard to the US or springboard to Europe quite soon. But that said, in a way, that's a good thing for them, right? They have to be hungry in order to survive. In Singapore, I think we do have actually a fair number of successful cybersecurity startups. But I think the key thing for us as an economy is to make sure that we go outside of Singapore, outside of even Southeast Asia, to the bigger regions as well. So those are some of the key differences I see. Apart from that, with frank talent, we have a huge amount of talent as well, especially after the formation of the cybersecurity agency, I-71, a lot of the focus in the universities and even polytechnics. There's a huge talent pool. And we have Google, Facebook, Grab, all setting up their regional headquarters here as well. So in a lot of the metrics, we would be actually a huge ecosystem to help cybersecurity startups succeed.
Okay. There's actually a question, a follow-up from Andrew. He says, according to a report, the top 25 cybersecurity companies are US-based. Is there any niche that Singapore can be strong in?
Joseph has that niche, I think.
Yeah, so I mean, if you just talk about absolute size, right? You can say, well, okay, top cybersecurity companies, US, but then of course you have your e-commerce companies, right? So you have your Amazon on one side and your Alibaba on the other side, and you have your equivalents, right? Your Google and your Baidu's and all that. So just of course from the market size alone, if you look at that natural size, then yes, the US and China will be the two big behemoths globally that will tend to grow those huge companies. So I think, but it's not just about the absolute size, right? I think it's also around, I mean, especially if you're a young entrepreneur, deciding where to start up. Sure, maybe you guys dream of being a trillionaire in the US, being the next Jeff Bezos. But I think most entrepreneurs just want to make sure they are in that 1% of successful startups if you are a consumer startup, or maybe that 40% of successful startups if you're an enterprise startup. You just want to make sure that you're successful, right? And I think Singapore and the Asian region is actually growing so phenomenally. And actually there's a huge amount of opportunity in this region and in Singapore And Singapore in particular is a fantastic springboard. I think we all know that, and especially when it comes to cybersecurity. So I think, you know, I'm not sure it's as useful comparing ourselves to the US or China or even Israel per se. I think every region will have its own strengths. I think Linda and I will both know, you know, there's obviously a lot of good stuff about Silicon Valley, but there's a lot of downsides that you need to manage if you're an entrepreneur as well. So I think with all the pieces that we have in Singapore, that I really think that, you know, as Linda and Benson said earlier, if you're not successful, you really look at your execution, your product, because actually everything else is in place to help the startups here be successful.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting for sure. I just wanted to also check, a lot of people say that 5G and IoT are the next coming waves. Do you see cybersecurity also playing a part in that? And how do you see it helping in protecting that data?
Yeah, I think as Linda mentioned earlier, cybersecurity is really a horizontal that cuts across all these different opportunities and verticals that we see. I've been in cybersecurity long enough, you know, since the early 2000s. Before 5G, you know, we were talking about 4G. Before 4G, we were talking about 3G. We were talking about Wi-Fi and WiMAX and all the great stuff that's going on. So people ask me, you know, 5G, before IoT, there was M2M, you know, essentially the same thing, right? Just maybe not as internet connected. But fundamentally, the opportunity is the same, actually. So, you know, and yes, my technology, we do have IoT deployments. We are talking to companies around a lot of different, you know, all the way from smart meters to smart homes to electronic SIM cards to mobile payments. So there's a lot of opportunities in IoT. There's a lot of opportunities in automotive when it comes to, for example, 5G kind of use cases. So those will definitely develop over time. But I think as a cybersecurity startup, you could, of course, have a technology that is or a solution that's very technology or vertical specific. There's been a lot of success with, for example, cloud security companies, you know, a number of acquisitions recently in that space. For example, I've been quite surprised actually how resilient, you know, what I would consider to be fairly traditional network security companies have been. You know, you might think, what? Firewalls and antiviruses and, you know, intrusion protection systems, isn't that passé? We're looking at these 15 years ago, 20 years ago, right? But there's still new ideas coming up. People are still buying them. And that's an example of a fairly fundamental technology that really just doesn't go away, right? I think at the core of it, when we develop new solutions, new technologies, cybersecurity can be quite complex. And the people developing these new technologies don't always, you know, build them from you know, we don't quite have a secure network when it comes to the internet. We don't quite have secure operating systems when it comes to Windows or iOS or Android. Academically, we know what a secure operating system looks like, and we know it's not feasible to implement that in a consumer device. Yes, there are a lot of new technologies out there. As a cybersecurity professional, you need to stay nimble, understand how your product will be relevant to these new technologies. But I think there's nothing wrong with just looking at the current use cases as well. They will probably be around a lot longer. With, you know, phishing has been around for eons, and we're still facing problems with phishing, right? So I think as a cybersecurity company, it's going to be quite evergreen, actually, when it comes to the verticals that you target.
Yeah, and I think as the devices, right, more and more devices getting connected faster and faster. So what we'll see is like so many more unsecure areas that can be attacked. And so I think there'll be a lot of opportunity for that, because if you look at enterprise, I mean, on average, what are they using? Like 60 to 70 cybersecurity products to cover different things, right? Because of all the different ways that they can be attacked. And so I think there's a real opportunity there for a solution that can say, look, you know, how can you streamline this, you know, rather than, oh my gosh, how many different points can I be attacked? And then those vendors and the solutions that I have to manage on top of that. And so that might not just be that the solution, you know, is the issue, but it might be the number of solutions that you have to worry about. So yeah, definitely a lot of opportunities coming down the pipeline for that too.
Awesome. I think this is an interesting point in terms of the fact that Rachel has raised this point actually. She said some governments has fast forwarded their digital infrastructure plans by 10 to 15 years. And she's asking, what are some of the main opportunities and challenges for cybersecurity and digital defense in the future? And how do you balance between that security and privacy?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about that a little bit earlier, right? How much people are willing to balance. But what I see also in streamlining this for governments and in general, biometrics is an issue. People are using, right, fingerprints, and they're using the iris, things like that. And that will maybe a concern. And some of our startups are trying to, identify and resolve those issues in terms of the biometrics of it all. So, that's something that we see.
Right. Joseph?
Yeah, it's interesting because actually I chair Singapore's Security and Privacy Standards Technical Committee. But it's interesting because I think in Asia in particular, most of us are security experts. We tend not to be as strong as privacy experts. So unlike, I think, traditionally in the US and Europe, where there's a lot more focus on privacy, and probably converse that there isn't as much focus on security actually. In Asia, it's the other way around, right? Most of the time when we design systems, we are very, very concerned about the confidentiality of the data, of the keys in particular, but we don't traditionally pay as much attention to personal information. And that is obviously changing. And what we are actually seeing is that the same technologies that actually enable security actually do enable privacy and can enable privacy in many use cases as well. And that's what we've seen in a lot of companies in the US and Europe. Just in Asia, we have tended to focus on the security aspect. So I think it is important. It is a developing area. And yes, I think for cybersecurity startups, it's important to think about how your products and your technology if they're fairly fundamental, could apply to both security and privacy as well. Because especially when you go outside of your home country, whether it's Singapore or Hong Kong or Manila or Indonesia, you're going to find that, the customers in this other country have a slightly different way of thinking about how they're solving security and privacy issues. And if you can be nimble in understanding how your product actually solves those problems, both the security and privacy aspects, from a variety of ways, then actually you'll be quite well positioned to be able to address the needs in a variety of customers and verticals.
Right. And I'm interested in coming from a small business owner perspective. You see that right now there's a sort of baseline of security. You sign into a web application, you do a 2FA by the email, and you do that one verification email, and that's the standard. There's no more security after that. What do you think is the new baseline, especially for these SMEs, especially for these startups that are starting up those SaaS platforms?
So we service customers that have very high security risk levels. Banks are helping their customers protect millions of dollars. I still remember after my Series A pitch to the investor who eventually became my Series A investor, he was like, in the past, I would log on to my iPad, to my US bank account, key in my username and password. Once my finance team has said, okay, we've done the due diligence and transferred millions of dollars to the startups with just a username and password. He's like, I'm going to stop doing that now. So I think definitely the baseline in the past was quite low. We have seen that rise, especially for banking and government. But I think one important thing for cybersecurity startups in general, our technology tends to be quite complex, and we have all these wonderful ideas about how we can make it more secure. But actually a very key thing is around the user experience. It's around the friction. It's around the difficulty, even for the IT guy to understand and set it up and help his users on board and so on. Don't just think, I have this wonderful technology. Think about how your users are going to use it. So from our perspective, for example, our motto, in fact, when we were first founded was trust simplified. So we wanted to develop it so that it was easy for the banks to implement, easy for the end user in terms of the user experience, and easy to understand as well. So, and we see that as our job as a cybersecurity company, right? It's not just enough to have reams of technical documentation, but it's also our job to have the right PowerPoint slides, the data sheets, the positioning, to help our customers understand, okay, why should I use this? So when it comes to SMEs in particular, it's true. To them, it's like, why do I need something other than email? Why do I need to protect my users from phishing? Why do I need second factor authentication? And as security professionals, we think, oh, that's the new baseline. You should at least have an SMS OTP, if not a software token, if not, PKI authentication or, KYC, all that kind of stuff. But how do you actually build it into the user flow? How do you put it on the cloud? How do you deliver an application seamlessly so that your end users can actually adopt the technology very easily? And it shouldn't cost them $1 million, maybe just $1 per user per month or something like that, right? So that's very easy for them, as SMEs in particular, to really onboard with security. And we think that's really quite critical because, digital transformation, we're really trying to make sure everybody comes on board that. And in order for that to happen, it needs to be simple, it needs to be cheap, it needs to be easy to use.
Right.
Yeah, otherwise you'd have 1,000 FA, right?
Yeah, that's right. MFA,
So Linda, I'm just wondering, for these SME clients, maybe you could recommend or suggest a few of these solutions from ICE 71 that SMEs can look at from their affordability standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, so as I mentioned before, one of our startups, OneKey, he does this key that looks like a USB port so that you can protect your data when you have your personal data around, so you don't need to actually hand over your personal data. We also see actually for individuals that what might be helpful is subscription services, right? That you don't have to sign on and really download and get this, long process to really implement into your system and get your employees on board. And so we see those products being used more. One of our companies, for example, like I said, 689 Cloud, they're kind of like the Dropbox for secure documents. And so you have solutions like this where SMEs can use it. It doesn't have to be an arduous process to onboard. And I think also as we look, like I said, more towards the biometrics, maybe, you look towards solutions of our startups like NeoHide, where they're looking at not only how the number that you're pushing in for your password, but how you're doing it, the behavior, and so maybe the SMEs can look at, solutions like that that are more affordable. And of course, we think that the innovative, affordable solutions will come from the startups, that they can really help them scale up in the most affordable way. And so that's why we try to connect our startups with the users and really get both sides to benefit from that.
Right. Do you see, like in social networks right now, we generally give away a lot of data. Do you see that changing anytime soon as cybersecurity takes more foothold?
I was like, I'll give you the lawyerly answer. It depends. Right. I think you just have to see like where it takes us, and the trends. I think you have some social media companies where they're all in on taking as much data from you as possible. And then you have the other side of the spectrum where they're actually trying to, or they say they're trying to help you protect your data. And so it's going to be a matter of the user tolerance, and so, I mean, I see that as an issue. Social media, we also see the issue is the deep fakes. You're seeing more and more of that. And so how to identify that either technically or how to, again, use the human element and, educate people, not only employees and adults, but maybe we should start doing cybersecurity awareness, at a younger age where they can identify, what are all these fakes, so that you kind of learn that not only from a young age, and then to obviously then the elderly, you have the other side of the spectrum, where we're afraid that they are not used to the technology and that they may get, negatively impacted by these. And so again, I think it's about the education, it's about access to information and resources.
Joseph, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would take a bit more of a pessimistic view. I think the social media companies are just going to run with our data, as will the search engines and everybody, if they can, right? Some companies trumpet that, data is everything, and, they own the customer and all that kind of stuff. And if you're a consumer-facing startup, that's probably going to be your business model, right? And I think the investors expect it as well. So I think that, I think that is a given in today's economy. And it's also a given that, individuals, SMEs are never going to be really security conscious, not to the level that we need them to be. So personally, I see it as our job as security professionals to really build in the security, the privacy into every aspect of what they are interfacing with. So, the man on the street, my kids, our parents, our grandparents shouldn't have to worry, when I sign up for this, is this secure, right? I told my marketing team, I have a mind to run a video marketing series. Yeah, you should do online banking because it's all protected by VKey. But, it'll take a while before you convince everybody to come on board with that, right? But the point is actually that, there are people that are thinking, oh, can I trust this? Can I trust that? Is my data secure here? Is my data secure there? And the problem is we're interacting with so many digital services. It's really difficult and not very economical actually for individuals to have to figure it out themselves, because even as we have increasing numbers of cybersecurity professionals, it's still nowhere herd immunity in our population to have this kind of secure cybersecurity understanding. So I really do think we have to build it in to our banking, to our e-commerce, to our social media, to our internet services, and so on. So that, we can just use Zoom, we can just use Microsoft Teams, we can just use, Microsoft Office, we can just use Google and iOS, and kind of it's all taken care of for us.
Right. So one final question to wrap things up. We see generally now more countries becoming more and more nationalistic. Supply chains are becoming regionalized. In the same way, do you see cybersecurity not being able to sell to a global audience, but instead only able to sell within the region or within the nation itself?
Well, I think I spoke a little bit earlier about how cybersecurity is kind of, different than other sectors, and that people may look at that. And that's why, I think it's really hard to I think, kind of be in this economy right now, in such a global interconnected economy, to really, clamp down and say, oh, only from my country for everything. We're so interconnected now that I think that's why the partnerships and the connections and the networks within the countries also makes a difference. But I think, having said that, we do see that people say Singapore is the Switzerland, of the region, and that they find that a cybersecurity solution coming from here is kind of makes sense to them and what they're trying to do. And so that's why we see that a lot of the startups that come into our programs, that they will come here, and if they're not based here already, they will actually register here and try to make their headquarters here, because they see the benefits of that, not only in the government programs that we mentioned earlier, but in the customer base.
Right.
Yeah, I think traditionally in cybersecurity, there have definitely always been aspects where governments feel more comfortable buying from domestic producers. As I mentioned, I used to head the cryptography lab, and I think cryptography is one area which tends to be quite sensitive for very highly classified information. Governments will roll their own cryptography algorithms, they'll build their own encryptors, local domestic production, and all that kind of stuff. But if outside of those, very highly specialized units, you do find governments buying commercial products off the shelf, and there's actually a huge demand there. So my recommendation to cybersecurity startup, you could, of course, whether in your own home country or in Singapore, build a product that only caters to that host country. And that's always a possible business model. You will probably never grow very big. but you can probably make some money. Or you could build a cybersecurity product that would probably be able to span the whole spectrum. You don't have to target all the verticals. Your solution will probably cater to some verticals better than others. But if you design it right, actually, there's no reason why a customer in the US or China or Germany shouldn't feel comfortable using your own solution. Especially if you can document the architecture and the security and explain why it is secure for them, right? The same arguments that help a customer feel comfortable that your technology is protected against an insider attack will also make them feel comfortable that, oh yeah, I can trust this. It doesn't really matter where it's coming from because the design is right. So I think as a cybersecurity company, it's really beholden on us to try to do our job right. I mean, to be frank, in my company, even though we are based in Singapore, we have people from all over the world, right? The UK, from China, from Vietnam. We just pick the best of breed for whoever we can find, right? But we also have very strong processes and technology architectures internally and control mechanisms as well. And so as a cybersecurity startup, don't think that it's only going to be something that can sell to one country or even half the world eventually. But if you do it right, you should be able to sell to the whole world.
Right. Thank you very much, Linda, and thank you so much, Joseph, for answering those questions and taking the time. I'll just hand over to Ethan to sort of run with some notes.
Great. A heartfelt thank you to Benson and also our speakers, Joseph and Linda. Thank you everyone who has tuned in. We appreciate you being here. We hope that this fire chat has been useful and you're able to take away insights and feel inspired by our speakers. For those of you who are keen to find out more about solutions and services offered by Zencode and vKey, please do scan the QR codes embedded here. For more information on the suite of I-71 programs for cybersecurity startups, please do scan the rightmost QR code.
Great. Well, thanks everyone.
Yeah, we have come to the end of this webinar, and if you're interested to hear more about exciting developments in the tech scene, the latest happenings in Singapore, do sign up with SGN. Here is our QR code and URL. We would also love to hear from you about your experience in this session. We have a very short survey, and the QR code and link is here, and any feedback is welcome and appreciated. Once again, thanks for joining us this afternoon, and see you in our next event. Thank you and take care.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.